So today I'm going to plant out my tomatoes. I've been hardening them off for a couple of weeks, so gradually acclimatizing them to the outdoors, ready to plant out. And now that it's the middle of May, the danger of frost should be past here in France. It's probably more like the end of May in England. I've been growing lots of different varieties because I joined a seed swap group and got lots of interesting heirloom varieties. And I'm growing a range of cherry tomatoes, plum tomatoes, beefsteak tomatoes and regular salad tomatoes, so that I've got multiple uses. I can freeze some, I can make some into sauces, I can use some fresh, and they'll keep me going right through into next winter that way. I've got here Super Roma and Noir de Crimée. The Super Roma is a determinate type or bush type tomato, and what that means is that they'll reach a certain height before really starting to set fruit, and then they don't get any larger. They then produce fruit from the top down, and they ripen in that order. The cordon types, which is most of these other varieties, the cherries and the salads, they keep growing and keep producing more trusses from the top of the plant. So I've made this really sturdy structure to keep tying them into, because they need support for the weight of all of that fruit. I'm using the bed that in a normal rotation system might be used for brassicas, but we don't tend to grow too many brassicas. My beans were in here last year, so it's got lots of nitrogen in the soil, which tomatoes need. They're really heavy feeders, and they need nitrogen at the beginning of the season. And then later on, they need more potash. And we had bonfire on this ground, and I've been putting all my wood stove ashes onto it too, which will provide potash. I've just taken one of them out of the pot. It's a really nice sturdy little root system, very ready to plant out, and they're not too leggy at the moment, quite sturdy plants. The danger of sowing them too early in the glass house is that you can end up with really floppy leggy plants, and they suffer from pests and they tend to fall over. You can just see at the base of the stem there's some little nodules. You can bury them slightly deeper if you have grown them a bit leggy, because they will root from the base of the stem. And I've planted all these now and tied them into the poles, and I'll have to keep doing this as they keep growing. It's really important to keep them supported, but don't tie them too tightly, because those stems are going to get quite thick. And what you really don't want to do is damage the stems, because this is how diseases like blight and botrytis get in. So handle them really carefully, but make sure you keep tying them in. The cordon varieties will need the side shoots taking out, but we'll look at that later on when they've grown a bit. The other thing I'm going to do here is plant some companion plants, because they suffer from a lot of pests like whitefly and greenfly. And calendula is one good flower that helps to detract them. And also I use that for sort of homemade skincare and cosmetics. And here I've got some cinnamon basil, which has a really strong smell, which also deters the whitefly, and it's a great companion in the kitchen as well. So I'm growing basil alongside my tomatoes. They make really good companions. I planted the basil in between the actual tomato plants, but here I've just made a shallow drill, and I'm sowing the calendula seeds in a similar way to what I sowed the carrots a few weeks ago. And they're quite big chunky seeds, so I haven't had to prepare the ground too finely, and I'm just sowing them along the row. You can grow them in pots, but it's a resource, it's space in the greenhouse. They'll germinate perfectly well in the soil now, because they're hardy annuals, and they're quite used to being outdoors. So I'm just covering them up now. So tomatoes suffer from quite a few pests and diseases, and it's one of the big battles with them. One of them is called blossom end rot, where the base of the tomato goes black, and actually this is a lack of calcium, and it's particularly problematic when you're growing in compost, because compost doesn't contain the minerals that the garden soil contains, mainly calcium. And so if you're growing in a pot, it's worth mixing in some sterilized soil, or if you can get hold of it, some John Innes type compost, because that contains loam. It it helps to stabilize the growing media and provide mineral nutrients that you find in the soil and that you don't find in regular compost. So the tomatoes need a range of nutrients in fairly large quantities, and it's normal if you're growing them in a pot to have to add a liquid feed as well, which is high in potash once they start fruiting. Going to have a little look at potato blight in a minute, which is the other big problem with particularly outdoor tomatoes. Just going to water them in, and I'm watering straight to the roots, and trying not to get any water on the leaves, because that can cause scorching, it can cause fungal diseases, and I'm just going to water them in really well. And I probably will mulch my tomatoes. I don't really mulch vegetable plants because it tends to conceal slugs, but I really want the soil to stay steadily moist, or the tomatoes will split if you get sudden changes in the amount of water. And here's a picture of blossom end rot, which can also be caused by lack of water. If they don't have enough water, they can't take up the calcium that they need. So that can cause that problem too. And also overwatering, if they're in a pot, can actually wash all of the calcium out. So they need a good steady supply of water. Covering the soil with a mulch will also help to deter potato blight, which is a soil-borne fungal disease, and the spores will live in the soil over winter. And this is one of the reasons why crop rotation is very important. And it causes, first of all, a sort of shriveling and blackening of the leaves, and then the fruits sort of rot from the inside. It's particularly horrible and particularly prevalent. And so what I'm going to also try this year is to cover my tomatoes with a sort of large cloche later on in the summer, when blight tends to be around sort of in June and July and August, because it's rain splash that splashes the spores from the soil onto the leaves, and then the spores enter the leaves through the little pores in the leaves and invade the plant that way. So I'm going to try and cover the soil first of all, which will help to prevent the spores from being able to be splashed up, and I'm going to try and cover the plants later on, which will also help ripening.